Om Namah Shivaya. Hi friends, how are you? In this video we are going to learn about scaphoid fracture. Scaphoid fracture. The fracture of scaphoid is the most common fracture of carpus and usually occurs due to fall on the outstretched hand, and the fracture occurs at the narrow waist of the scaphoid. Fracture occurs at the narrow waist at the scaphoid. Clinically, it presents as tenderness in the anatomical box. Clinically, it presents as tenderness in the anatomical box. Blood vessels mostly enter the scaphoid through its both ends. Blood vessels mostly enter the scaphoid through its both ends, but in 10 to 15% cases, all the blood vessels supplying proximal segment enter it through the distal pole. But in 10 to 15 cases, all the blood vessels supplying the proximal segment enter it through the distal pole. In this condition, when waist of the scaphoid is fractured, the proximal segment is deprived of blood supply and may undergo avascular necrosis. See once again. Scaphoid fracture. The fracture of scaphoid is the most common fracture of carpus and usually occurs due to the fall on the outstretched hand. Fracture occurs at the narrow waist of the scaphoid. Clinically, it presents as tenderness in the anatomical box. Blood vessels mostly enter the scaphoid through its both ends, but in 10 to 15 cases, all the blood vessels supplying proximal segment enter it through its distal pole. In this condition, when waist of the scaphoid is fractured, the proximal segment is deprived of blood vessels and may undergo avascular necrosis. Coming to the figure, if you see this figure, these are the carpal bones. These are the carpal bones. See what are them? This is the scaphoid. Scaphoid, trapezium, and this is the trapezoid, capitate, hamate, and this is the triquetral, and this is the pisiform. This is the lunate. These are the carpal bones, and the proximal bones are proximal carpal bones are scaphoid, lunate, triquetral, and pisiform. These are the proximal carpal bones, and the distal carpal bones are trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, hamate. These are the distal carpal bones. And this is the first metacarpal. Like this is the thumb. From lateral to medial. Guys, if you see here, this is the scaphoid carpal bone. If you see here, this is the narrowest waist of the scaphoid. Mostly the fracture occurs at this region. In 10 to 15% of people, the blood vessels enters through the distal pole, that which supply the proximal part of the scaphoid. If the fracture occurs here, and the blood supply will stop to the proximal part, and this causes the necrosis of the proximal part of the scaphoid bone. This is the narrowest part of the scaphoid bone at which mostly the fracture occurs. I show you the X-ray. If you see this figure, this is the scaphoid bone. This is the scaphoid bone, and this is the trapezoid, and this is the trapezium and trapezoid, capitate. That's one. This is the scaphoid bone. Here is the junction at which the scaphoid bone fracture occurs. This is the narrow point at which the scaphoid fracture occurs. This is the anterior and posterior view in radiology. I show you another one in CT scan. This is the CT scan, and this is the scaphoid fracture. This is the area. This is the narrow area. Mostly where the scaphoid fracture occurs. Okay guys, this is about the scaphoid fracture. Okay, if you like this video, like, share and subscribe. Thank you.